There's a certain kind of person who doesn't dream. They plan. Not because they're disciplined, but because the same invisible gas pedal is always pressed down inside them. A little more, a little bigger, a little faster. Three impulses that sound like motivation and sometimes are nothing more than restlessness dressed up as ambition. Ambition is healthy when it's a tool, when it serves life. But when it becomes an identity, it stops being ambition and turns into hunger pretending to be vision. That's where the story of Mars and Jupiter begins, not as an astrology lesson, but as a psychological mechanism. Mars is the drive that gets you out of the chair. Jupiter is the sensation of expansion that whispers that anything is possible. Together they can create miracles, but they can also create someone who never really comes home, even when they're at home. The problem is rarely that you lack strength. The problem is that you're not allowed to stop, because stopping feels like failure, like a blow to the image you have of yourself. At first, everything looks clean, even noble. You work more. You take responsibility. You push yourself past the line. People love to watch it. Society rewards it. Culture romanticizes it. And you start to believe that living with your foot on the gas is the same thing as being alive. But something else is happening underneath. While you think you're building a life, you're building an addiction to expansion. Not to the result, but to the internal rush of being on the rise. That's why success doesn't calm you, it agitates you. Because the moment you reach a goal, a thought shows up that you don't want to hear. Now what? Who are you when there's no next mountain? Can you sit inside your own silence without burying it under a plan? And while you think speed is saving you, it slowly changes the taste of your life. Anything that isn't productive starts to feel suspicious. A conversation without a point feels like waste. Rest becomes a luxury you have to earn. Even when you're sitting with people you love, there's a calculator running inside you. Part of you is constantly checking whether everyone around you still fits your direction of growth. That's the moment ambition stops being energy and becomes ideology. Your day looks successful, but your body knows the truth. Alarm, phone, plan. The immediate sense that you're already behind. Coffee isn't pleasure. Coffee is a starting gun. Your mind spins with projects like open tabs. Your body is tense, but you call it motivation. At night you can't lie still. Not because you have too much work, but because silence has become your enemy. When there's no noise, you can hear yourself. When there's no plan, you feel the unease. When there's no expansion, doubt appears and you smother it with work. That's when you start saying sentences that sound healthy, but are actually alarms. I'm just using my potential. It sounds great, almost inspiring, but sometimes it really translates to this. I can't slow down because I'll feel the emptiness. In that moment, the gas pedal stops being a tool and becomes a sedative. Ambition stops being a path and becomes a way to avoid meeting yourself. That's why it's hard to stop even when stopping would be wise. That's why you don't rest, you just shut down temporarily. That's why even winning doesn't bring peace, because peace means being alone with yourself without the noise. And that's why obsession can look neat, rational, controlled, and that's what makes it dangerous. You can live for years inside that story without anyone ever naming it for what it is. Escape. You think you're building something big, but you're buying a sense of worth through expansion. You think you're a fighter, but you're afraid of being ordinary. You think you never quit, but you don't know how to stop without guilt. That's why even small things turn into battles. You eat fast. You talk fast. You cut people off because you already get the point. You listen only for what you can turn into a decision. When someone tells you to rest, you hear criticism. When someone says you're too tense, you hear an attempt to slow you down. So you build rituals that look like self-help, but are really just extensions of the obsession. One more book, one more seminar, one more workout, one more system, one more spreadsheet. Sometimes even spirituality becomes performance, as if peace has to be conquered. And then the body sends the bill. Insomnia, acid stomach, a clenched jaw, a short fuse. The feeling that everything irritates you. You don't call it overheating, you call it a phase. And that word hides the tragedy, because the phase becomes a lifestyle. When Mars and Jupiter are pushing too hard in the same direction, your relationship with risk flips. Mars drives you forward. Jupiter gives you the conviction that everything will open up. And the more you achieve, the more you start to believe you're above the rules. You stop working intelligently. You start working as if it's destiny, as if every new expansion proves you're the one. Investments get too big, promises get too wide, projects get too inflated. Your schedule becomes inhuman, and underneath it all is one brutal logic. If I stop now, I'm finished. That's why it matters to see it in a real example, without romance. Napoleon was a French military and political leader who reshaped Europe in a short span and became a symbol of power. He already had fame, territory, status. He was already a legend. And still, in 1812, he launched an attack on Russia. Not because he had to, but because enough sounded like defeat. That's the moment expansion becomes a need, not a strategy. When you stop choosing moves and start serving the impulse, you're no longer a leader. You're a hostage to your own image. That invasion didn't break him only because of winter. It broke him because of the idea that there is no limit. And the same idea breaks people today, just in a more modern costume. In business plans, in one more project, in one more month after which, supposedly, peace will arrive. But peace doesn't come, because the problem isn't the calendar. The problem is the internal gas pedal that never gets released. In the modern version of this story, it can be an entrepreneur who keeps expanding and raising the stakes. It can be someone in the markets who won't close a losing position, because closing feels like admitting defeat. It can be a content creator who can't post a video without anxiety, because the numbers after posting decide what kind of day they're allowed to have. Jupiter inflates you with the big picture story. Mars pushes you to hit hard every day. And between them, a question disappears. The one that could save you. Is this still my choice? Or is this my compulsion now? When the gas pedal stays pressed for too long, you start confusing courage with impatience, vision with grandiosity. And then reality arrives like a wall, always at the worst possible moment. The quietest part of this story is relationships, because obsessive ambition rarely looks like cruelty. More often it looks like absence. You're physically there, but mentally you're inside a plan. Your partner speaks, and you're already calculating. Your child calls you, and you're already tracking where your time is leaking. A friend calls, and you say you don't have the energy. And then you say the sentence that sounds innocent. Just for now. But for now never ends, because for now isn't the problem. The problem is the belief that only later will you be worthy of peace. Only later worthy of love. Only later worthy of coming back down to earth. Slowly the relationship becomes a negotiation. Your partner stops asking for your presence and starts asking for your availability, as if closeness has turned into logistics. You come home late with a win in your pocket and expect applause, and you're met with silence. Not because they hate you, but because they've shifted into survival mode. And then the obsessively ambitious person often makes the worst move. Instead of stopping and looking at what was lost, they defend themselves with pride and say, "You don't understand my path." As if the path is above people. That's where the psychological contrast becomes brutally clear. You think you're building a future for us, but you're really building against your own feeling of not being enough. You think you're carrying everything, but you're controlling everything. You think you're protecting, but you're avoiding vulnerability. When success becomes more expensive than closeness, it stops being success and becomes compensation. In that kind of relationship, you don't always lie. You delay the truth. You promise a weekend, and work eats it. You promise a conversation, and exhaustion replaces it. You promise presence, and you bring gifts, as if closeness can be purchased. And over time, you don't even notice when people stop telling you what they really feel, because they've learned that your world runs on goals, not nuance. Then, right when you think you're at your peak, there's a small cut. Your partner pulls back. Your child stops showing off in front of you. Your friends stop calling. And you rationalize it as the price of success. But the price of success isn't the real problem. The problem is when success becomes an excuse for emotional illiteracy. This theme is as old as human beings, which is why literature can be so precise when you really read it. Macbeth is a character from Shakespeare, a warrior who receives the idea that he could become king. He doesn't start as a monster. He starts as a person who gets a door opened, and a hunger for more wakes up inside. One step feels like an exception. The second feels like necessity. The third becomes character. And suddenly you don't see yourself falling apart. You only see that you have to continue, because going back would mean admitting it started from the wrong place. That's the mechanism of shame. You're not afraid of failure. You're afraid of confession. And that's where the tension shows up that we all feel but rarely say out loud. Where is the line between strength and excess? Aristotle, an ancient philosopher, taught that virtue lives in measure, in the precise middle, not in the extreme. Nietzsche, a modern philosopher, celebrated will, overcoming, and the kind of strength that goes beyond limits. Both touch something true, but when someone lives with their foot on the gas, they use Nietzsche as permission and treat Aristotle as weakness. Measure becomes mediocrity. Rest becomes betrayal. Humility becomes humiliation. Life turns into a relentless offensive against your own insecurity, and you stop working for meaning. You start working for a verdict. And I'll tell you something personal, briefly, without dressing it up. I've been in a phase where the best part of my day was the moment I proved to myself I was stronger than exhaustion. From the outside, it looked like character. That's what I called it. But the truth was simpler. I was addicted to the adrenaline of my own discipline. I wasn't training character. I was training escape. Only when I stopped, not when I succeeded, did I realize how restless I was without a goal. It's a brutal discovery. You're not afraid of failure. You're afraid of peace. And here's another archetype that captures this hunger perfectly. Faust is a scholar from German literature who makes a contract with the devil in order to gain even more knowledge and power. He's already educated and respected, but enough is never enough for him. He doesn't trade his soul because his outer life is empty. He trades it because something inside him can't tolerate limits. One more boundary to break, one more level to conquer, one more proof that he isn't ordinary. And it's the same trap. Whenever you feel emptiness, you fill it with expansion, and expansion is a bottomless pit. Obsessive ambition often carries one sentence in the background that sounds like reality, but is actually a prison. If I'm not growing, I'm falling. A black and white world where life is constant struggle and constant war, where you can't just be. You have to be on a mission. But a mission without a soul becomes mechanics, and mechanics without love becomes a prison. The worst part is that from the outside it looks like success, so no one notices you're burning. That's why the myth of Icarus is so useful, as long as you don't turn it into a motivational poster. Icarus is a figure from Greek mythology, a young man who flies with wings made of wax and feathers, and he receives one rule: not too close to the sun. He isn't told not to fly, he's told not to fly too high. But he can't do it, because height becomes proof, and a limit feels like an insult. He doesn't fall because he wants to die. He falls because more replaces wiser. Integrating this energy isn't about killing ambition. It's about returning it to human measure. Let the gas pedal be a tool, not an identity. A healthy version has brakes, and brakes aren't fear. Brakes are intelligence. A healthy version has a reason that isn't ego, because when you know why, you don't need endless more in order to feel alive. A healthy version has a limit that doesn't humiliate you, because a limit is proof that you respect reality. Then Mars and Jupiter become what they're meant to be: vision and courage, wide thinking, and the ability to leap, but without the caricature of strength that's loud, exhausted, and hungry. Healthy ambition doesn't demand constant proof of worth. It allows worth to be the starting point. It lets you say, today I won't grow, today I'll live, and tomorrow the world will still be here. Obsession can't tolerate that sentence, because obsession demands constant confirmation. That's why it's freeing to understand this. Releasing the gas isn't losing strength. Releasing the gas is getting control back. Control isn't pressing harder. Control is being able to choose. And when you learn that, Mars stops being an internal war and becomes clean will. Jupiter stops being an inflated story and becomes meaning and breadth. Then ambition becomes a path again, not an escape. And then comes the quietest test. The biggest test for an obsessively ambitious person isn't whether they can succeed. The biggest test is whether they can succeed and remain human. Can you win without becoming harder? Can you build without becoming colder? Can you grow without burning down what gives your life meaning? Because ambition without integration doesn't become greatness. It becomes a curse. The gas pedal can be pressed for years. It can take you far. It can make you impressive. But it can't make you free. Freedom comes only when you can release the gas and not panic inside the silence. Then something rare happens. You no longer have to prove you're more. You can be enough. And that's exactly why you become sharper, calmer, more real. You build not to escape yourself, but because you know who you are, even when nothing is expanding.